In the early days of a young America, long before smartphones, traffic jams, or social media arguments, life moved at a wonderfully slow pace. Imagine a world where people woke up with the sunrise, not because they had an early meeting, but simply because there was nothing else to do. In small, quiet towns, the sound of a rooster crowing was considered genuine entertainment. The arrival of the mail carrier, who sometimes came only once a week, was the biggest social event, the absolute highlight of everyone's week. Even the letters themselves were usually quite boring, filled with long discussions about crop prices, detailed weather predictions, and endless complaints about how the roads were always muddy. Most people walked everywhere they needed to go. The pace of life was literally the pace of a person walking. If someone was fortunate enough to buy a new pair of shoes, it became the talk of the town for at least 3 days. As the country expanded westward, the government set out to map the vast, empty lands. Surveyors spent weeks and weeks just walking in perfectly straight lines, making their way through dense forests and wide-open grasslands, drawing tiny, precise lines on big sheets of paper. Their job was so repetitive, so monotonous, that even they sometimes forgot what state they were standing in. Travelers back then rode in wagons that moved slower than today's bicycles, bouncing along on uneven wooden wheels for days and days. A journey that now takes us just a couple of hours in a car once took 2 full weeks. Most conversations during these long, bumpy rides were just people quietly counting how many trees they had passed, just to have something to do. It was said that even the horses were bored, often stopping to eat grass simply to break the sheer monotony of the journey. There was no rush, nowhere to be, just the slow, steady rhythm of the wheels on the dirt road. In the early 1800s, American cities began to grow, but even the word growing was a slow and uneventful process. Streets were unpaved, making them dusty and dry in the summer, and a sea of mud in the winter. Shopkeepers opened their stores with the exact same routine every single day, sweeping the very same spot on the floor, arranging the very same goods on the shelves, and greeting the very same customers who came in to buy the very same things. Newspapers carried long, dry articles filled with complicated sentences that almost no one ever bothered to finish reading. It was common to see people sitting on their porches in rocking chairs for hours, just staring at the sky, waiting for something, anything, interesting to happen. Most of the time, nothing did. Eventually, trains arrived. But the first trains were no faster than a running dog. Passengers would later say that the most exciting moment of the entire trip was when the train whistle blew. The conductors repeated the same announcements day after day, and travelers sat staring out the window at endless fields that all looked exactly alike. It was a common sight for entire towns to gather at the station just to watch a train come in, even if no one was getting on or off. In a world with so little stimulation, the simple arrival of a train was the closest thing they had to big entertainment. The first train stations had no restaurants, no shops, nothing but benches where people sat in silence, listening to the steady, comforting tick of the clock. Meanwhile, in the quiet government buildings, politicians debated topics like new postal routes, the details of road repairs, and how much tax should be collected on imported tea. These discussions would last for hours and hours, and were so mind-numbingly boring that even the people giving the speeches sometimes dozed off. Visitors in the gallery would pretend to be interested, but most would quietly nod off as well. Lulled by the droning voices, one senator became famous not for his brilliant ideas, but because he spoke so incredibly slowly that everyone in the room lost track of what he was saying halfway through his sentence. Minutes melted into hours, and the only thing that changed was the angle of the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Out on the farms, life continued with a peaceful, predictable repetition. Every single day started with feeding the animals, checking the crops, and repairing fences. Farmers discussed the weather in great detail, debating whether rain might come tomorrow, or perhaps next week, or maybe never at all. Their evenings were filled with quiet chores, like churning butter, a task so repetitive, so rhythmic, it could put almost anyone to sleep. Children played simple games with sticks and stones, until they, too, grew tired and just sat watching the clouds drift slowly across the big, open sky. Even celebrations were quiet. calm affairs with people sitting around a fire telling stories they had all heard many, many times before. By the late 1800s, American towns had grown, but that same sense of routine still dominated everything. Street lamps were lit by hand every evening, and people would often pause their activities just to watch the lamplighter walk slowly from one post to the next, bringing a soft glow to the quiet streets. Shops closed early, leaving the town nearly silent except for the occasional horse-drawn carriage clattering by on the cobblestones. Families gathered inside their homes to read books by candlelight. The books were usually dull instructional manuals or very long novels with endless, detailed descriptions of trees, sunsets, and oceans. Most people didn't even finish the books. They simply fell asleep, peacefully halfway through a chapter. Even when electricity finally arrived, the first light bulbs just flickered and buzzed. But not much else changed. People still followed their predictable routines, and towns still went completely quiet after sundown. Early factories ran slowly, producing simple items like nails, buttons, and tools. Workers repeated the exact same motions all day long, counting the hours until they could go home to their quiet evenings. At night, the sound of crickets chirping was often the loudest noise anyone heard. Life continued peacefully, quietly, predictably, and for many, this was just the way they secretly preferred it. And so, through much of its early history, America moved at a calm, steady, sleepy pace. Things happened slowly. People lived simply. The days blended together, and the years rolled by without much excitement or drama. It was a time of routine, of repetition, and of quiet, gradual progress. There was nothing dramatic, nothing explosive, just the steady, patient unfolding of a nation being built, one uneventful day at a time. And perhaps for anyone listening now, this gentle, peaceful slowness is exactly what you need. A reminder of a simpler time, a quieter world, to help your eyes grow heavy, your body relax, and your mind drift into a quiet, deep, and restful sleep.